home live of 2022. We are so super excited to be here with all of you, and we have a great show planned. First and foremost, I want to tell everybody about the NAMI Tennessee email list. It's absolutely free to join, and you get such great curated content, and you get a lot of information about local advocacy, which is also our topic for today. So just head over to namitn.org and sign up so that you can be aware of everything that NAMI Tennessee is doing. All right, let's meet our guests. We have two wonderful guests today. Who would like to introduce themselves first?
I'll jump in, Gabe. Hi, everybody, and Happy New Year, and Happy New Year to you, Gabe. It's great to see you again.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm Alisa LaPolt, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for NAMI Tennessee. And what that means is I help identify pieces of legislation, policies that would be helpful for individuals and families affected by mental illness. And also, we try to fight anything bad that might be happening. And then I also teach people how to tell their story about their journey through mental illness so that policymakers can understand and be influenced and have a really good idea about what they're voting on and how it affects people. So that's who I am and what I do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Ken?
Yeah, well, I'm a NAMI parent. I'm with NAMI Massachusetts up in the Boston area and have been involved with NAMI for the last several years. I've had my healthcare consulting practice for 25 years or so. And in the course of that lets me do a lot of my own things about advocacy. So I worked with the Massachusetts Consumer Health Quality Council, part of Healthcare for All, and advocating about reducing medical errors. And then several years later with Tobacco 21 campaign for the American Cancer Society on raising the minimum legal sales age for all tobacco products, jewels and e-cigs, cigars, cigarettes, everything from 18 up to 21. I was the grassroots campaign coordinator for the American Cancer Society for that, and done a whole lot of advocacy in other ways, shapes, and forms over the years as well. So hope to talk about how we can make some of that experience useful in the mental health advocacy field.
Wonderful. Well, it's very nice to meet you both. So since we're talking about local advocacy, I thought I would have a direct question just for each of you. And I'm going to start with Alisa, which is, what have you done in local advocacy? And I will pop the question on the screen as soon as I can find it. There we go. Alisa, tell us about what you've done in local advocacy.
Sure. So I'll start out first by talking about statewide advocacy. And what that looks like is, if there's a bill, for instance, that might be helpful for Tennesseans who struggle with mental illness or their loved ones, what I would do is send out a newsletter, a call to action, an action alert. We have a very large email list, and I encourage people to call their legislators and influence them to vote for the bill and why this bill would affect them. But when it comes to local advocacy, it's a little bit different. It's more focused on the legislators in the community. And I'll give an example. There was a particular issue in a legislative session last year where it was a funding issue, and one of the Chattanooga legislators sat on the committee that was making decisions about this funding issue. So I contacted our members down in NAMI Chattanooga, our affiliate there, talked to their affiliate leaders and said, hey, can you make a few phone calls and emails and get this legislator engaged in the conversation? And they did. And NAMI Chattanooga in particular has great relationships with the legislature, members of the legislature down there. So that's a good example of how local advocacy would work.
Wonderful. And Ken, we have the same question for you. Tell us about what you've done in local advocacy.
Well, part of it was with medical errors, as I had worked in the field for several hospitals and felt really good about the work that I had done with our big team. And then 6 months later, my father-in-law died from a medical error. And so I started focusing much more on that and hearing from other people that had happened to. And I worked as a volunteer with the Consumer Health Quality Council in Massachusetts for Healthcare for All, So we made videos of our stories. We told our stories in all kinds of different places at state legislative hearings, and that was more at the state level. But then when a law was passed about encouraging hospitals to and requiring them to make certain policies and to make it safer to get medical care there, after that our group broke up into and we divided the hospitals, 65 hospitals in the state, and each of us surveyed several of them, the same survey, just to make sure that they were really implementing the new law. And so that I thought was a real useful kind of tactic, because we could get into the local level, and we're asking, people in the hospital in the towns where we lived, what they were doing to take care of our, in effect, our family members, friends, neighbors. And so that we then wrote a report about it, to kind of keep them on their toes. It's kind of one example, anyhow.
That is a great example. I have a few questions. I'm going to go out of order, which is why I'm stumbling along the side, because you sent a great graphic, Ken, and you mentioned in your open that you worked on the local advocacy or statewide advocacy to raise the purchase of cigarettes, e-cigarettes, tobacco. And even though the question came later, I wanted to get to it now because you mentioned it. And of course, I can't find it because that's just the way that it worked. But the specific question is, can you discuss this picture? And let me find the picture and pop it up. Ken sent a great picture over. Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So, what I was when I first got into that field, I was stunned to realize the variety of different products and how glitzy they all are. So this is a photograph of a gas station, Sunoco gas station display of tobacco products in Connecticut, and in Hartford, Connecticut. And usually, and I don't know if viewers can see well enough, but these many of them are cigars. They're candy flavored cigars: strawberry, grape, raspberry. They're in a bunch of fruit flavors. The packages look like candy, but then some of them have silhouettes in black of beautiful women without any clothes, and they're clearly appealing to teenagers, and for those are probably teenage boys and girls, and these things look like candy, and they smell fruity, when you open the package. And these stores that sell these things, or gas stations, convenience stores, places like that, are particularly there's a Murphy's Law. They're within several hundred yards of high schools, because that's their market. That's where they're trying to appeal there. So what I would do in our strategy for the Tobacco 21 campaign was a local strategy, town by town, in Massachusetts and in Connecticut, to a lesser extent in Rhode Island, for example. And what I would go to the high school, I'd find out where the convenience store was that's closest, go there, buy some of these things, and then show them to the local Board of Health, to the people in the schools and so forth. And everybody was shocked because of the way these things look. You just had that most middle-aged people are not smoking these candy flavored cigars, which have nicotine in them. And you just don't realize, even if someone smoked cigarettes for quite a long time, they have no idea what these things look like. So just showing those products was very powerful and was very persuasive, in making the case that, like, oh my God, there's really a clear and present danger here for the kids in my neighborhood. So, now what's the analogy for what can we do that's somewhat similar to that in mental health, a local advocacy? Well, we want to make, what is unseen but disturbing, we want to make that known. And so we need to gather the stories from people, and then to tell those stories in a way that is going to be a revelation to people, that it's going to be a real aha, wow, I had no idea. That's the feeling we want to create. We can talk later in the broadcast, or now, Gabe, if you want, and Alisa, about collecting those stories and focusing them and so forth. Do tell me which, if you'd like to go that direction.
Yeah, I'm looking at this picture, and I want to pop it on the screen again. And I think a few things. One, it's very appealing. When I first looked at the picture, I actually thought, well, why is he sending me this? This just looks like a really good marketing display, and it really did invoke the idea of candy to me. It looked like every aisle I've ever been down in a grocery store for candy, and I thought, wow, talk about just really putting it in the ideas of you mentioned 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, and I'm thinking you put it in the ideas of 5-year-olds. I mean, whenever I was good, it was like, well, go down that aisle and pick anything you want, and there you go. Of course, it was the candy bar aisle, right? But right next to it and pretty close is something that looks like that. I know you've talked about that. I know you provided the picture, Ken. You talked about it, and I again was struck by it as I was probably one of the people that was like at the health department, was like, really? Are you serious? So I wanted to put that out there. But Alisa, before we move forward, do you have any thoughts on this and how it relates into the work that you're doing?
I do. I think anytime that there's a picture, you know what they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. With advocacy, pictures can speak volumes. One of the most moving advocacy campaigns I saw in my years of lobbying was when I was in Tallahassee, Florida, working lobbying there. And this wasn't my bill that I was working on, but it had to do with firefighters who were trying to get a law passed to mandate insurance coverage when they had work-related cancer, like cancer from something stemming from the job. And one day I walked out of the Capitol, and there were like hundreds of these little wood cutouts with a firefighter cap and a firefighter jacket and firefighter boots, representing all the people in Florida who had died as firefighters from a cancer-related illness on the job. And it was so powerful. And I just think that pictures and images like that can be super helpful when you're conducting an advocacy campaign.
I could not agree more. As I said, it really worked on me, Ken. So I can imagine how it worked on the rest of the group. I'm also starting to realize when you're talking, you're like, well, older people don't go in there. And I was like, I go to no, I don't. Yeah, I don't. I don't. So yeah, and they are conveniently located usually to people who maybe don't drive or can't walk. They're neighborhood stores. They're quick things. And I know people who just want to pick up something quick, which are generally party favor type things like alcohol, cigarettes, chips, things like that. Are definitely the people who shop there, which does means that their kids are going to stop in with them. That's not even unreasonable. But you're right. It does look very, very appealing. Ken, you had more to say on the subject. So yes, now is a great time. I want to drop it right back to you.
Well, also, and Gabe, so it's like you talked about how that, those are like the candy wrappers. They look just like that. And so, in the tobacco field, we would talk about that we want to change the normalizing was a big concept for us. So, when the tobacco products are there on the shelves, it appears that it's a normal thing. And like you say, that every kid, even a lot of them under 18 want to buy them, right? That's the normal thing. And so if we can, so we needed to change what was normal so that it was no longer, the norm that people smoke or use these things. The norm that was not cool. That was the uncool thing to do, or we'll have the products be behind the counter, only available for 21-year-olds, and so forth. So now, so what's the analogy for doing local advocacy in mental health? So what's to normalize, right now there's a lot of stigma about mental health and people don't want to talk about it. But if we can change that so that it's more normal, that everyone realizes that everybody's got someone in their family who, a relative or a cousin, or everyone knows someone or had a friend or knew somebody in high school, that if we can get our story, get people talking about it with each other in a non-judgmental way, then people realize that, oh, that's the norm. And then it's much more it's discussable, and it's much more, we can then do something about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ken. All right, jumping in to the next question. I love this one because it's so open-ended, but I know that you must see out there people doing local advocacy wrong, or just doing advocacy wrong, and wrong is such a strong word, but what does everybody know about advocacy that is just absolutely wrong? And you can decide who gets to go first. Ken, actually, it's fair that you should get to go first. Whoops,
That's right.
Am I pointing the right way this time? Ken gets to go first because Alisa went first last time.
Right, it's up in Massachusetts, so that's,
that's
north. Yeah, right.
I got it right.
Right. Well, to me, I mean, it's, there's no absolutes in this, right? So it's not that something's always wrong, but I see people thinking sometimes that clicking on something is advocacy, and it is. Okay, you can like something, or you can click your name and add on a petition that's circulating electronically. But to me, much more of the power of the influence is really face to face. And that's really hard in this COVID era, right? But I got to think that it's temporary, and this too shall pass, right? But I think that you really need to be, to talk to people face to face, if at all possible, and maybe on Zoom or, something like that. If face to face is not possible. But I think that getting out there and talking to people, ideally where they live or where they go to school, is going to be much, and at a city council meeting, or with a police chief, with your local police chief, if NAMI parents can get together, and we can talk more about that later if you like, but that's going to be much more effective, I think.
And Alisa, same question posed right over to you.
Sure. I actually have two answers to this. The first is, I feel like people think that the only way that they can influence policy or advocate is to march on Washington, or go to the state capitol and thousands and thousands of people. And certainly, as we've seen in recent years following George Floyd, we've seen so many of these in-person activities, and that is a way to get attention. But the thing with a rally or a march is it's one day, it's one event. And if you're going to do it, you need to go big and bring thousands of people. You can also influence, as Ken said, one-on-one with your policymaker, a sit-down meeting or a phone call or an email. That carries a lot of weight with legislators. The second thing is, people I find don't feel like they can make a difference, and they can't advocate, or they won't be heard. And I'm here to say that that's not the case. Legislators will listen. You're a voter, so that's a potential vote. So they're going to give you time. And one person and one voice can make a difference.
What you said there, Alisa, reminds me of a quote that I kind of keep in mind, which is, I had to work 10 years to become an overnight success. The reality of these big things that we see, the March on Washington, rallies happening nationwide, there wasn't nothing the day before, and then that was their sole advocacy point. It slowly built up to that with one-on-one connections, legislative advocacy, groups forming, people getting together, and then it did reach sort of the boiling point, right, where all of this happened, and we got a lot of attention. There was a lot of attention very, very quickly. But if you ask any of the organizers of those group what they were doing yesterday or what they were doing last year, they were doing those one-on-one things. So it's so many people don't want to get involved with the local NAMIs or the local mental health group because, they're not doing anything big. They're not doing anything big yet. And even NAMI Tennessee, little plug for NAMI Tennessee, we have the walk every year, right? NAMI Tennessee gets together, and there's not in COVID. That is that has changed the dynamic a little bit. Several hundred people in multiple cities across Tennessee get together and do those marches. And Alisa, I know that while they're not, huge and get a ton of media coverage, you have, again, before COVID, we always kind of have to asterisk things, but you had the meetings at the State House that I believe you led, where dozens of people, I'm not sure how many people were there. I'm not a good counter, but in our world, these are in fact big, big numbers. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because again, you weren't doing nothing the day before and then showed up with a whole bunch of people and then did nothing the next day. That was all part of the plan. And that's why you need these single people so you can get those big numbers.
Right, exactly. Our day on the Hill pre-COVID in 2020, January 2020, drew about 60 people. And the thing of it is, it doesn't sound like a lot of people, but when you're at the Capitol, in this case, it's the Court Hold building, and you see people with their NAMI buttons, it makes a visual impact. Like I mentioned earlier, you need something with a visual impact. And we had meetings with at least half of the legislature. And those meetings, they were sit-down meetings, and they make a difference because legislators like the one-on-one discussions. Now, we are having our next Day on the Hill, our Day of Action on March 1st. Not sure what that's looking like with this Omicron variant, but we will be doing something on March 1st, so mark your calendars for that.
That is wonderful.
And Gabe, and so to also, if I could add something to Gabe, to your comment about how it builds over, these activists, build up to a point where they can then get the bigger scale and the bigger results. So a case in point of that in the tobacco work in Connecticut, for example, like I would the neighborhoods in Connecticut are, in at least in some of the biggest cities, are broken up into neighborhood revitalization zones. And I remember, so I went to one of them. The small community groups might have a dozen people meeting, once a month or something. And I'm talking to one group. It was called Frog Hollow, was the name of the neighborhood. And then so it turned out that one of the local aldermen was in the audience that day. I didn't even know who she was until the end of the meeting. But, so I went to, several of these neighborhood revitalization zone meetings. And then, the leaders of those organizations are then influential with the state rep of their town, okay, and the state senator who represents them. And then, so they can then talk to that person. And when that person then maybe hears from me or one of my teammates, and then they think, oh, they're the organizers, the active political leaders at the local level think this way about it, and maybe I should too. And so in Connecticut, that originally the two of the most powerful state legislators had blocked Tobacco 21, a law for Connecticut. But then when they saw that the local, that because of that legwork with the local neighborhood revitalization zones, that the city council had voted yes, and the city council of Hartford, which was in the districts of the two key state legislators, they then changed their minds on Tobacco 21, and it became a state law. So, but it really, as you said, it does take some time. But starting at the local level, you can really have the leverage as it builds up to the next level.
It's always shocking to me how people think that it's not slow. I'm having trouble putting it into words, but I've been a mental health advocate for over a decade, and I truly and legitimately thought that I would have made more progress. Mm-hmm. I really, really believed that this was just an educational issue and that I'm very loud. So I would just yell the correct information out into the world and people will hear it and think, that's a good point. That man knows what he's talking about. And this problem would have been solved, I don't know, 9 years ago. I've been wrong about that. It's taken a lot of patience, and I always am very sad when people don't want to get into advocacy because they don't think that they can make a difference, or when people leave advocacy because of how long it's taken, because then we have to, of course, recoup their numbers. So thank you so much, Ken and Alisa, for letting people know what they see. And hopefully this will inspire some people to either get involved when they don't think they can make a difference, or stick around a little longer if they're thinking about moving along. We absolutely need you. All right, the next question that we have is, what should people do if they feel like they can't talk publicly about the difficulties in their own family? Are they still able to advocate on the local level if they're not willing to publicly discuss things?
I can actually answer that one. I don't want to disclose names or cities, but we have a high-ranking person in politics in a particular county here in Tennessee who has mental health challenges in his family and doesn't want to talk publicly about that because it would, he's afraid it would bring unwanted attention to the family. And so what he's doing is working behind the scenes, because of his position in the community, is able to quietly work behind the scenes with people. And definitely we want people to feel comfortable and speak up, and that's how we get over the stigma. But we also understand that people aren't comfortable and there might be consequences. And so yeah, you can work quietly behind the scenes.
So, and to add to that, and sometimes it's, you can discuss other people's stories as well. So there was a story in the New York Times on Thursday, front page story, about a state trooper in Pennsylvania who had responded over a long career, to several occasions of 911 calls when there was a mentally ill person involved, and maybe threatening suicide or something else, or armed. And he had shot 4 different people to death over his career, which is a huge number. No, that it's so rare, especially because he was in a very rural part of Pennsylvania where the crime rate is really low. And it's right. This was just inconceivable. But that, to me, that really speaks to the need for crisis intervention training, which you all have done a lot of. And Tennessee is a national leader in that, I think, and has been the founder of it as well. And, so it speaks to the need for getting that kind of training, to chiefs, to police lieutenants, to the patrolmen and women, at every level. And so, then is it possible that NAMI members, or maybe with some colleagues or friends, could go to meet with their local police chief if that police department hasn't had any crisis intervention training, and say, Chief, could you look at this story in the New York Times? Now, it's this death didn't have to happen. And so sometimes you can tell stories, find stories in the local newspapers or national newspapers. And the other is, as Alisa, as you mentioned, that can you keep people's identities confidential? I wrote a patient safety blog with hundreds of stories about people's encounters with the medical system where there were medical errors involved. And so each time I would ask, sometimes I would talk to the person ahead of time and say, well, how do you want us to use your full name? Do you want to just use your first name? Do you want to use a pseudonym? If they wanted to change their age or the location where they lived, I could do that. I was willing to change those details because I didn't think it would interfere with the real story. The story itself had to be true. But so sometimes there are ways of protecting people's confidentiality that way as well.
Yeah. Can I jump in here with a couple other thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ken, you bring up a good point, is anonymity. I find that there are some people who don't want to advocate because it triggers their anxiety. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be questioned. It's been a painful journey for many people on the road to recovery from mental illness or substance use disorder. And I think that's an excellent way, is just to use initials or a hometown. So I just want everybody to know that if you do have a story, we can help tell that story and also give you anonymity. The second thing is, I do think that as leaders in NAMI, such as myself, I think it's important for us to step up and tell our own stories. Now, certainly I've gotten my family's okay to tell the story, and I talked publicly about it. I had a sister with substance use disorder who passed away from medical problems because of that disease. And then a couple of years later, her son died by suicide. And I talk about that, and tell the story about my family. And I think it's important for us at NAMI to do that, so we can be role models for other people and show courage and bravery.
Thank you both for your answer. I would also point out that joining an organization like NAMI Tennessee, even if I think an annual membership is with $35, $50, I apologize, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's not a lot of money for the course of a year. And even if that's the only thing that you do, you're a member in good standing. And when NAMI goes to advocate and they say, look, this is our position and we have 10,000 members, 5,000 members, 100,000 members, depending on where they are across the state, those numbers mean something to legislators. When NAMI National, they count everybody, and we get into millions of people. And that really helps, especially on the federal level, when the executive director says, I'm representing a group of this many members, all of them paying members. It's not just a click somewhere. You sort of voted with your wallet mentality. This really helps move the needle to get a seat at the table, and we desperately need a seat at the table. So even if that's the only thing that you do, and I sincerely believe that people will slowly find their way up. I want everybody to know that I did not start at this level. I started going to a NAMI walk 15 years ago, and it just sort of grew from there as I gained more comfort and as my family gained more comfort. So once again, it's another example how doing something very, very small and still being private can really lead to big things. Thank you both.
There's another. Oh yeah, and there's another example comes to mind that that if legislators are trying to attune themselves to what their constituents want, and so they can get reelected, and so, but they rarely hear from people. The state reps and the local councilmen, councilwomen don't hear from a lot of constituents most of the time. So if they hear 2 or 3 stories, or 2 or 3, 4 or 5 people talk to them about one issue, they are going to think, oh, these people must just represent the tip of the iceberg. And Alisa, you alluded to this before as well, and so there are lots more, maybe there are dozens or more, hundreds of people in my district who feel this way, who haven't spoken out about it. I better agree. I better, think hard about, what my position is here on it. So it really can multiply. So even just a small number of people can really have a big effect that way.
Very, very true. Now, Ken, you mentioned that Tennessee is the national leader in crisis intervention, and Alisa works very, very hard to make sure that Tennessee stays the national leader in crisis intervention training for law enforcement. So, Alisa, I pose this question to you. How would you like to expand the CIT program at NAMI Tennessee?
We have such a great opportunity at NAMI Tennessee to bring this program to so many other communities. Basically, CIT is Crisis Intervention Team Training. And what we do at NAMI Tennessee is we help bring stakeholders together in communities. Those stakeholders could be school principals, law enforcement officers, city councilmen, mental health advocates, and talk about how to help law enforcement respond to individuals in a mental health crisis. Ken, you were mentioning the story in Pennsylvania that was in the New York Times. And there's also another really important component, which is a 40-hour training for first responders, police officers, EMS workers, firefighters, dispatchers, on how to respond to the individual, how to de-escalate, and then how to get them services. so that the community comes together to show these first responders where they can refer individuals in a crisis. Do they go to a walk-in center? Do they go to a hospital? And we've already got the basis for that. The CIT program was founded in Memphis, and it's been a model that's gone internationally. So here in Tennessee, we at NAMI Tennessee have gotten funding from the U.S. Department of Justice, also through the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, to grow this. And we're already in 18 counties that touch 3 million people. We want to expand it even more. There's 95 counties in this state, and we would love to see the CIT program in every county. And we're excited that we got some funding from the department to do that in the next year.
That is awesome. Ken, I know I posed the question to Alisa, but do you have any thoughts on the expansion of the CIT program?
Yeah, for sure. In Massachusetts now, it's widespread. At least it's in many of the police departments, and yet there are still some that have not had any training in crisis intervention teams in handling 911 calls. So what I would love to see, and I'm going to see if I can do this in the next month or two, is, well, I've already ascertained, like, what are the 5 biggest towns whose police departments have not had any crisis intervention training, the chief, the lieutenants, the patrol men and women, nobody. So in those 5 towns, can we go, can I talk to the NAMI affiliate people who are there and see, well, would 1 or 2 of them go with me to their local police chief and say, hello, chief, can we, what about this? We've heard some great things about it. And gee, in Newton, which is a suburb of Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, in Massachusetts, that a man was killed by the police in January a year ago, January 5th, almost exactly a year ago. He had a knife in his convenience store, but it was clear from the dispatch the call to 911 that he must have had some mental illness or substance abuse issues. So and he was shot and killed by the police. So that could happen in lots of places, in across the country, really. But we really don't want that to happen, at there. And it's very preventable. Can we get together and have a meeting and then have these officers and the chief and everybody else go to this 40-hour training?
I, as a man who lives with bipolar disorder, I am very aware that if I have a crisis, whether it's publicly or privately, and my family members are worried about my safety, their safety, or anything in between, and they dial 911, which of course is what people are taught to do in any medical emergency, they're going to send the police. Now we can argue until we're blue in the face about why that is, but the bottom line is that the police are the first responders for a mental health community, and many of them are not trained. So we have determined that we want police to handle this, but we don't give them training on how to handle it. Now, many people are like, well, but, and there's all of the excuses that I hear, but I always say, well, let's change the word slightly. Let's say that you are hired as a cook, but they don't train you to be a cook and you have no previous experience being a cook. What would you think of that business owner? And everybody's like, well, that business owner's a moron. Somebody's going to get hurt. The food's going to be awful. You're going to alienate your customers. Okay, but this is my life. That's just a bad hamburger. So again, I think if we start thinking about this way, it's a lighter lift, because listen, as bad as it is for me, it's equally bad for the officers. They don't want bad outcomes. They didn't go to work in the morning to have a bad outcome with a person suffering from a mental illness. They don't want to see their name in the news. They don't want to be used as an advocacy point by by mental health organizations. They don't want to wonder, hey, if I had only received the training, would X, Y, and Z have happened? These are very detrimental things for law enforcement as well. So I think we need to start thinking about that.
and can also be detrimental, I mean, to their own health. I mean, it can injure, the police officer can be injured in handling a 911 call with an armed person who's mentally ill, you know. So there are many police who are in favor of it for that reason as well. It's not just helping the citizen.
Absolutely. I really feel very strongly, and I don't think I'm going to get any disagreement from this crowd, that it's such a good idea. I'm really having trouble finding the objection to it. Law enforcement is already doing this work. Providing them with the tools to do the work well and correctly and safely just seems like common sense to me. But listen, Gabe does not run the world, something that my therapist reminds me of every session. So thank you both so much for discussing CIT. I don't think any conversation about local advocacy would be complete without it. We have another question that I feel is very good on the individual level, and it's, what should people do if they don't have a big group of allies? So they've decided, hey, I want to be an activist, I want to advocate, but I'm all alone. What should I do?
Well, one thing you can do, I guess the mantra is to find your tribe. You know, who else thinks like you, and you can look in sometimes in kind of unlikely places. But for us in the mental health area, ministers, priests, rabbis will often have contact with family members who, mom or dad might go to them and say, oh, what do I do about my son or my daughter or my niece? And so the ministers often know that, quite a few members of their flock, of their congregation are dealing with some of these issues, and they may be very, very receptive. So in the tobacco campaign, they care a lot about the health of their congregations. And so when I would show them these tobacco products, and then I was able to get, their support of 4 or 5 of our, I think 4 of our ministers in the town where I lived, for a petition to the local Board of Health that would make a local law restricting the tobacco purchases up to, to age 21. They were quite willing to, to help in that. So you might look to clergy would be one, and to educators would be another. In the tobacco field, that these teachers and really cared a lot about their students' health, and so we found that getting that principals would sign a petition that would go to their own towns, their city council or their board of health, and the school superintendents as well, who were politically quite well known to the local politicians. So now in the mental health area, I would think also that educators, these people know about their teenagers, some of the teenage students who may be exhibiting depression, anxiety, or substance abuse. They're aware of it, and their principals and assistant principals are aware also. And so I bet that you have allies there as well for the advocacy in mental health at the local level.
Thank you, Alisa. Same question.
I think Ken summed it up greatly. Find your tribe, and that could be going on social media and seeing who else posts things like that you're interested in. Start following them. You don't need to be part of a huge tribe. Part of my job at NAMI Tennessee is what's called coalition building, pulling together other organizations, like-minded organizations for a common cause. For instance, we work with Mental Health America and Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association for those type of issues, but we also work with the disabilities community because mental illness is a disability. So, but at the local level, just start talking to your friends, your neighbors, and see who's listening to you. You don't have to have a huge coalition. It just takes a few letters or a few phone calls to legislators to start to really make a difference.
There's
another tribe.
Oh,
yeah, I might just to add that another tribe, another organization was especially helpful for us in Connecticut in the tobacco campaign. So, and I think that Tennessee and most states, almost all the states, have a chapter statewide chapter of HOSA, H-O-S-A, which is, I think at one point, I think it stands for Health Oriented Student Association. So these are high school students who want to be doctors or nurses or pharmacists, some other health profession. And there are these clubs that it's a state association, but it's made up of local chapters in a bunch of the high schools across the state, in almost all states of the country and even internationally as well. And so we found that these young people were really great. They're very passionate, they're engaged, they're interested, they're kind of public health oriented. And anyway, so one way that we got them engaged, we would bring them to, we would, kind of coach them about, what they might say to the city council, and then bring them there. And the city council just ate that up. It was so cool to see kind of maybe younger versions of themselves, or maybe the kid they had wanted to be and never succeeded in being, back in high school or whatever, back in the day. But one of the things I set up a contest across the state HOSA association. We had them gather stories of tobacco use by, a friend, neighbor, family member, and, when did they start, what effect did it have, and how much do they smoke and so forth, and, what did they say, do they, wish they have quit attempts and so forth, or maybe there was maybe someone died, from it, that they would tell us about an uncle or a grandparent or someone, or sibling. And so we had prizes both for the individual student who gathered the most stories, but also for the school chapter organization that as a team collected the most stories. And those became incredibly powerful, and we could then, use them at these local meetings. And they then they summarized them and put them on a poster and showed it at the Legislative Office Building in Hartford. And actually engaged several of the state legislators in the hallways about that, and shared their stories pretty widely. It was quite powerful.
That is amazing.
That's the tribe. That was the tribe on the warpath.
I think it's we talk about these small numbers a lot, and they come up a lot. And there's a saying that my grandmother always says to me, and she says, "If you think one person can't make a difference, try getting your work done with a fly in the room." And
Mm-hmm.
I like that, because I got to tell you, in my life, I've been most heavily influenced by single people one-on-one, more so than the masses. It seems to me that sometimes the masses are really easy to ignore. They sort of become white noise. But those one-on-one conversations where somebody takes the time to stand across from me and say, "Gabe, I got to tell you, I think you're seeing it wrong." I think that's very interesting. They're not looking for attention. They're not, it's just me. They're having this one-on-one conversation with me, so they must mean it, and that can really, really go a long way. Especially, as I believe Ken said, it sort of works its way up the chain. You change one person's mind, who changes one person's mind, who changes one person's mind, and that person just happens to have the ear of somebody who's voting on passing the bill, or whatever it is. You just never know what's going to happen, but you do know that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, because
Right.
Wayne Gretzky is everywhere. Well, we are rounding out. We're running out of time, but we have a couple of quick questions. We have the final question, and then we have one question that's just for Alisa. Then I want to ask her real quick, because we want to talk about NAMI Tennessee and what we are doing this legislative session. So Alisa, can you update us all?
Absolutely. Our legislative session starts 1 week from tomorrow on January 11th. And we've been working over the summer with our coalition partners on 3 major issues. One is a workforce development, trying to get more people in the behavioral health workforce. More social workers and psychiatrists need to be working here in Tennessee. It's a national issue. The second thing is promoting what's in the commissioner's budget. The Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, Commissioner Marie Williams, has proposed a lot of really great things, including more money for 3 new walk-in centers in the state. And then the third thing, and this follows up on something you mentioned, Gabe, is a new system for emergency calls for individuals in a mental health crisis. And it's called 988. So as you mentioned, when people call 911, when an individual is in a crisis, police, law enforcement shows up. With this 988 system, they're going to be talking to a trained person on the other line who can offer referrals to community services. Also, referrals to like suicide prevention hotlines, and de-escalate and talk people through the crisis that they're having, so we don't have to get law enforcement involved. So Congress passed 988 legislation last year on a national level. So it's up to the states now to figure out how a new 3-digit 988 system is going to work in each state. So here in Tennessee, we're going to be focusing on that.
That is incredible. Thank you so much. NAMI Tennessee does a lot of stuff, a lot of legislative advocacy, and people are always asking, well, how can I know what they're doing? There's so much throughout the year. And listen, you know what I'm going to say. You got to sign up for NAMI Tennessee's email list over at namitn.org. There are advocacy alerts that go out all the time, and we keep you up to date on what we're doing. It's absolutely free. It's about one email a week. It gives you all kind of great information. It even reminds you of stuff like this, the NAMI Tennessee at Home series. So please grab it. You'll like it. All right. Well, we have gotten to our last question that I want to pose to both of you. And it's really about 2022 and your advocacy agendas. So I'm going to start with you, Ken. What is your advocacy agenda for 2022?
Well, the first project I want to start with is to talk with the police chiefs of some of the towns that don't, that don't have the CIT training in effect, as I mentioned. More broadly, well, that's really to be determined. I need to gather some more people's stories and learn a lot more. I think my advocacy is really, I have some time, and I've got to figure out in the COVID world, how do we do it really? The 988 bill is also, it's a bill in Massachusetts as well, and I'm kind of in a lucky position, just where I live. The town I used to live in for 28 years, a suburb of Needham, has a legislator and the state legislator who's risen in the ranks in the House of Representatives, and so her daughter has a mental disability, and so she's very attuned to mental health topics. And then my current state rep, I had worked with at the American Cancer Society, and she may be the only member of the Mass State Legislature who has a PhD in public health. So she's very tuned in that direction as well. So I'm lucky to have these personal relationships, which I've also cultivated over the years. So it may be working with one or two of these women.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ken.
Yeah.
Alisa, same question to you.
Mm-hmm. I already mentioned some things that NAMI Tennessee will be working on: expanding CIT in more communities, more behavioral health workers, 988, more walk-in centers. I have a personal agenda also, and that is to have advocates at each of our affiliates and in as many communities as possible who could step up and be their spokesperson in their community on all things mental health related. That person who can activate people in their communities to make phone calls and write letters. And so I can send out an action alert and know that we've got people in communities that will step up. So this is all about building our network of advocates and also collecting stories. Story collection, as Ken had mentioned, was super important for his tobacco campaign. And it's super important when we talk about how successful mental health treatment can be in the recovery of many, many people.
Thank you so much, Alisa. Ken, thank you as well. The hours always just fly by. I really appreciate both of you being here. Thank you, everybody. The next one will be not next Monday. Or the next NAMI Tennessee at Home won't be next Monday. It'll be the Monday after that. Remember, there was a big announcement. It's every other week now. But you will know that, and you will get a reminder if you join NAMI Tennessee's email list, and you'll also find out about all the awesome things that we are doing. So please don't miss your opportunity. Ken and Alisa, thank you both so very much for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. All right, are we ready to wave goodbye?
Sure.
Bye, everyone.